This video contains spoilers for all of Tears of the Kingdom. If you can play it, I absolutely recommend it, it is fantastic. If you can't play it or you don't care, well, you have been warned. I was expecting Tears of the Kingdom to be one of my favorite games. I was expecting it to completely surpass Breath of the Wild, and also like it more than Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. Nintendo. You were supposed to disappoint me. I had my expectations too high. This game is way too good. It's instantly one of my top games of all time. The gameplay was very ambitious, creative and fun. The world was a masterpiece and the devs were a very welcome surprise. The characters were all amusing. The enemy variety was not perfect, it was a step up from Breath of the Wild. The side quests were so much better than Breath of the Wild. The dungeons, while not as great as traditional Zelda games, were still great with the mechanics of this game. Well, except for the water temple. The bosses were all fun and varied, the music was as great as always, and the story was really good and emotional more than once. It's not perfect, having to chase the sages to use their abilities was stupid and frustrating. The robot honestly wasn't very good. There are some UI problems. The story had some weird ways to tell itself, which means some people get a very well made story while others get a mess. It's still good, but some restrictions would have helped. And the worst one, repeating the same cutscene every time you beat a dungeon was a rookie mistake. But aside from these flaws and much more, I still think this game is a masterpiece and one of the best games of all time, just like I expected it to be. And my expectations are not always met, I was expecting it to be great. But do you know something I wasn't expecting? For the final boss to be so damn good. You see, much of my expectations for this game were based on what Nintendo has done in the past with this series. And one of the things that they never nailed was the final boss. The atmosphere is usually great, but every one of them has at least one huge problem. Ocarina of Time Ganondorf had like 2 attacks and wasn't very engaging, and Ganon had just one extremely easy attack. Majora's health was pathetic, which made the fight way too short, especially with the Fierce Deity mask. Wind Waker Ganondorf was the best, but he wasn't great either. Twilight Princess Ganondorf was long and varied, but with the exception of Puppet Zelda, every phase felt like it lacked something. Especially the last one. Instead of using all the skills learned in the fight was simplistic and it could be over too quickly. The Dark Knights were more engaging enemies. And finally, the Bringer of Demise was great, but the fight felt like it lacks another phase. It's over too quickly, and Calamity Ganon... Well, it's not a bad fight, but a boss that uses the moves from the other bosses isn't my ideal for the final boss. Look at Urisen, he does the same but he isn't the last one. And Dark Beast Ganon was just terrible, the worst in the series. You just run around waiting for the weak points to appear. So I wasn't really optimistic about the final boss of Tears of the Kingdom, but you already saw the title of the video, so let's get it on with. From my perspective, these are the things that may affect the quality of a boss. The build-up, everything from the story to the gameplay before the fight, the art design, the gameplay and the music. Let's start with the build-up. For the first time since Wind Waker in 2002, 21 years ago, I did not even exist, Ganondorf is the villain all throughout, no twist, no nothing, so they avoided the problem I stated in the last video. But aside from that, Ganondorf's presentation is excellent. The whole prologue feels like you're poking where you shouldn't, and you get a pretty ambiguous story for him that is expanded later. Once you get to him, he destroys all the hearts you had worked so hard for in Breath of the Wild, and proceeds, for the first time in the franchise, to destroy the most legendary weapon in the series, like it's nothing. And then he acts disappointed and doesn't want to talk to you. In fact, some minutes later, it is revealed that if Rauru hadn't saved Link, he would have died. Ganondorf broke the most powerful sword in the franchise and basically killed the protagonist with little effort in his first appearance. If this doesn't showcase just how dangerous and invincible he is here, I don't know what will. After this, Ganondorf disappears, or at least it seems like that. It is revealed that the Zelda you've been chasing was just a puppet of Ganondorf he was using to observe Link. So just like in Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker, Ganondorf is directly responsible for all the despair and danger you see everywhere. And his method is also very cruel. He is very aware that Zelda means something to Link, and he purposefully uses her not only to manipulate him, but also damages her image in the kingdom. However, the biggest motivator to defeat him, for me at least, was in the memories. Here we see how Zelda seems to start developing a family with Rauru and Sonia. It is really sweet since she had so much trouble with her own in Breath of the Wild. But then Ganondorf takes it all away from her and even laughs in her face. With the best smile ever, by the way. Not only with Sonia, but Zelda is also thrown again into a war. She loses Rauru, who has to sacrifice himself to hold Ganondorf for thousands of years, and finally, in order to give Link a chance to win, she literally sacrifices everything, and I mean it, everything. She was such a good person and she had to go through all of this just because of the selfish desires of the Demon King. It actually makes me think about how many other people had trouble like this thanks to Ganondorf. It is more effective for me than Breath of the Wild because in that game it was difficult for me to hate Ganon because he acted more like an animal. You can't really hate nature. But here he is just a very evil man who seems to enjoy the suffering of others. This game motivated me to ruin his plans more than any other Zelda villain, except maybe Majora in Majora's Mask. Finally, when you reach the beginning again, the atmosphere is just as good as the first time. It really felt like going full circle. And Ganondorf's presentation is just... The music and the ominous feeling this place gives was perfect, just as perfect as Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess finales. One last thing I want to mention is that they improved a lot the whole final boss at any point thing. In the first game it was neat, and you had to beat all the bosses to get to him. Although the reward for doing the Divine Beast was to reduce Ganon's health and it was disappointing, in Tears of the Kingdom I like it a lot more for a few reasons. First, the game doesn't tell you Ganondorf's location unlike Breath of the Wild. The only way to know this is by getting to the place or doing Master Koga's quest. Thanks to that, I was intrigued to discover Ganondorf's whereabouts and I felt like I was working towards that. But you can still fight him straight up in a future playthrough. And second, because this time it is intensely harder. The reward for doing the main quest is fighting with health, which feels a lot better than simply taking half of the final fight away. And when you refight the bosses, because you don't have the partner to defeat them, it makes it a lot harder. This is the reason I like it more, it makes you work harder to get it, so doing the main quest feels more worth it. In conclusion, the build up to Ganondorf is excellent, from the very beginning to the very end of the game. There are some things that could improve it, for example having more cutscenes to expand further on Ganondorf's backstory, or making Ganondorf himself talk to you after you discover Zelda was fake. But it's still fantastic, especially with how well the game makes Ganondorf feel powerful. The cinematography is just really good. Talking about shots, let's talk about Ganondorf's design, or designs, in this game. His normal form is great, combining elements from Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. He is really imposing and, well, everyone went absolutely insane with him. The samurai inspiration is also really good. I would have liked a trident like the original, but well, this is good. Overall, this design is easily my favorite from these games. And there are two more. Demon King Ganondorf is a really good callback to Demise, but still works great on his own. Again, really imposing. Power just emanates from this design. But my favorite is Corpse Ganondorf. The design is just so good. It looks dead but remains threatening. But my favorite thing about it is how the game uses him. He moves very stiffly, his shots are always godlike, he really feels like an ancient god. Look at this scene, the way his eyes pop is so creepy and good. I was also satisfied with how they balanced the screen time of the designs. I was afraid that one of the designs would get screwed, but no, they all have their time to shine. So yeah, all pretty, but how is the fight itself? First of all, though, I have to clarify something. When you judge a boss, you have to pay attention to what game they belong to. I say this because I've seen people criticizing this boss because it wasn't very hard. Like, when is this series ever that hard? What game were you playing? So yeah, I'm judging it as a Zelda boss. There's also another thing to consider. Breath of the Wild and this game have so much freedom that many times the difficulty can vary a lot. You can make a fool out of Ganondorf and have armor where he barely damages you, or you can go naked and fight him with weak weapons. There's not really a fix for this, it's just how the game works. So I'm going to judge this fight with the Master Sword, with no upgrades, with no fusions, a normal bow, the Hylian shield, and any armor, it doesn't really matter. Before we actually talk about the fight, I gotta talk about the one that prepares you, Phantom Ganon. Sort of curious that this is the second time he prepares you for the final boss. He shares a lot of his moveset with Ganondorf, so in a way you are learning how to fight him before you even know. These two have also similarities with Link in their fighting styles. They have a normal sword, a two-handed weapon, a spear and a bow. Not only that, but his moves have a striking resemblance to Link's. This creates a good rivalry between the two. You are trying to find out who's the better fighter. However, the moment that really sells this idea is this. It's actually interesting that they hadn't done something like this in Breath of the Wild. Made it even better here. Ganondorf can actually flurry rush and counterattack. The first time he does this is so shocking and cool. Another good decision to stop spam is that Ganondorf cancels his wind-up animation if you hit him, which guarantees a hit. He also has some extra attacks like an AoE attack with his glove, or a track attack straight out of Dark Souls. In this part it's impossible to shake the feeling that he is holding back. It's like super obvious, even the music hints at it. But what is also impossible to see coming is this.
What a feeling. I'd almost forgotten the thrill of battle. That feeling as blood surges in my veins. And I am not even nearing the limits of my power. Enjoy these final moments. I will be taking far more than your arm this time.
This is just perfection. First he uses the same effect as the Sages, which is a cool touch. Then the way the music kicks in is just so exciting. And the health bar, oh god, health bar. It seems like they heard the complaints with Ganon and decided to troll players. It works so well. Technically they could have just made his health reduced lower, but this trick is very intimidating, like saying that he's beyond anything you've faced so far, or also saying that his power is so unthinkable that the game can't calculate it correctly. It's just great. And that last line is just perfect. You could say that Ganondorf has technically taken almost everything from Link, which makes it very infuriating. The fight stays roughly the same, but with clones of the Demon King at his side. Here's where the Sages become very useful as they drive the clones away. It's an infinitely better reward than Breath of the Wild's. Instead of taking the fight away, it takes the pulse shell away. This continues until Ganondorf uses the clones to knock out the Sages. From here he finally considers Link a worthy foe, and fights with everything, a one-on-one. This last phase is the best one. Here Ganondorf becomes very evasive and uses gloom attacks that, like in the beginning of the game, take hearts out permanently, but they can be knocked back at him. One cool thing that many people miss is that if you try to hit these things with any weapon they break instantly, but if you hit them with the Master Sword they transform into light and send it back to him. So this is the same kind of attack but even more powerful that he did at the beginning, because they also take health permanently from you. So it's pretty much like blocking the attack that you didn't block before. It's pretty cool. And the best of all, if you flurry rush his attacks, he actually flurry rushes you back, and only by dodging this you can flurry rush him. You have to actually pay attention to his stance here because you have to dodge in the correct direction. By the way, it is hilarious how for years the Hylian shield being so unbreakable made many people believe it was indestructible, and here if you use it constantly, it breaks. Ganondorf can break the Hylian shield in a single fight. That's just great. This whole fight is simply excellent. It has a great atmosphere, a very despicable villain that even talks during the fight, something Zelda bosses never do, A good length that lets you taste the fight, and gameplay that may not be difficult but is very engaging, which is what they were lacking before. And you know what? After the huge amount of criticisms that Darby's Ganon got, one would think they weren't gonna try again, but they actually decided to give it another shot with a Demon Dragon. After his defeat, as usual for Ganondorf, he refuses to lose and decides to follow Zelda's steps. Where Zelda's case was tragic and sad, Ganondorf's is almost satisfying unless you see just how insane he is. He will rather lose everything than makes him himself as long as he doesn't lose. I also like it a lot more than Ocarina of Time's Ganon transformation or Breath of the Wild's. Because in those games it was like, oh, I'm so hungry, I unlock a new form, which works, but here he actually uses something that was established in the game that requires a sacrifice to make. The fight, like Darby's Ganon, is easy as hell, but there are many things that make it exponentially better. First is that the spectacle is a lot stronger. With Darby's Ganon you just run around, waiting. Here you dive in the sky and actually have to fall in him to hit his weak points, and then ride Zelda to go back up. It's so epic. It also helps that this time it feels like he can hit you. Don't get me wrong, he has very bad aim, but at least he can trick you, unlike Ganon who was very obviously stupid. And if he hits you, he takes permanent hearts, so at least there's that. It also helps that this time the game trusts that you will guess his weak points and doesn't constantly tell you. I actually went for his head first. The game also doesn't pull a weapon for the final boss. Instead you use the Master Sword, and if you don't have it they give it to you. Finally, the fight is pretty strong emotionally. Despite Zelda turning into a dragon and losing her mind completely, as shown throughout she still conserves some semblance of herself, and here she comes in Link's aid, which is just heartwarming. Also, I like how the dragon is called Demon Dragon or Black Dragon in Spanish, and not Ganon Dragon or something like that. Since Ganondorf gave everything up, it makes sense he also gave up his iconic name. Overall, this fight also works better because the fight that precedes it is actually excellent, so you don't feel like you're missing out anything. It's just a fantastic climax. The only thing I didn't mention is music because I'm no expert in that. But I gotta say, it's so varied. It starts with a very calm tune, symbolizing how these two are just analyzing each other, and it slowly rises the tension. Then it gets very bombastic and uses both themes from Ocarina of Time Ganondorf and Calamity Ganon, while also having epic and hopeful parts. And the Demon Dragon incorporates the dragon theme and main theme. Again, I don't want to sound repetitive, but it's so epic. So I think I already said enough. In conclusion, Ganondorf was one of the best final bosses I fought. Yeah, in general. He is at the same level as someone like Armstrong from Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. This fight absolutely deserves the title of legendary. Anyway, that's the video. If you liked it, consider subscribing and check out some of my other stuff. See you later.